Hey guys, today we're going to be building a sortable drag and drop list in JavaScript. But the cool thing about this is that they actually animate, so when you sort them, as you can see, look, it actually animates rather than it just popping into existence like the other sortable lists on tutorials already out there on the internet. So this one's a lot more interactive, as you can see, and it doesn't really matter how you move things around, it works either way without errors. So if this interests you, then keep watching. Now, before this tutorial begins, I will point you to the finished project's CodePen page. So if you get stuck at any point in this tutorial, you can go to here, the link will be posted in the description box below, and hopefully it will point you in the right direction. But now we'll talk about this Webpack Boilerplate GitHub repository that I've created for you. I'd recommend that you use it for this tutorial because we are going to be using newer JavaScript code, and I've already set up this this Webpack project, and what it does, it comes with a Webpack server, another like post CSS stuff, as well as Babel, and so it just compiles everything into a format that's compatible with older browsers, even if we use like newer JavaScript features and newer CSS features, etc. So I'd recommend that you use this repository and clone it for that reason. So inside the project of our choice, I'll copy this. Obviously it comes from the install instructions. Actually on the repository, again the link will be posted to this repository as well. And I'll just use a full stop to clone the project into the folder that we launched the terminal in. And then once we've done that, we don't need to cd into it because this terminal is already in the project that we just cloned the repository into. So we will, however, move the origin because we want to disconnect it from this remote repository, and then we'll run npm install because we need to install the necessary dependencies. And I will now cut to after I've installed all the dependencies and when I've got VS Code open and running. Okay, so I've now installed everything, and now I've launched up VS Code in the root project that we cloned the boilerplate repository into. And it's also good practice to delete the README markdown file because you don't want an exact replica of that from the boilerplate repository. And what we'll do actually, there's a script that's automatically been created, so I'll just ignore that. Yeah, but anyway, there's a script that's automatically been created in this Webpack boilerplate repository, and it's called dev. I'm running it. We'll just run a Webpack dev server, and it will serve our project on localhost port 9000. So now if you go to localhost port 9000, as you can see, we're already on it here. We should get this screen here, but it might change at a later date, but we should get some kind of a boilerplate screen just so that we know that things are working. I will delete this now because obviously we don't want a pretty ugly grey screen, and we'll also delete this here as well in the styles, which gets applied because it's imported here. And we're using something called style loader, which allows us to import style sheets into the main JavaScript file, which eventually gets bundled in this file here, which is incidentally the file that's linked to in the only HTML file that we have for this project. Well, we can import it either in the main one or just any file that's derived off of the main one that's on its import tree. But anyway, that's how we got the grey background. We should now have nothing because obviously we removed both the text and the styling. And what we will do is we will create a div called items, and this will contain our item div inside here. We'll have multiple of these item divs, by the way, but inside of here we will create a hamburger div, and this is to create a hamburger menu, and we'll need one more div inside a hamburger, and we'll call it center. Because this isn't a real application, it's just a dummy application, we will just have the text for the item div, and which is after the hamburger div. We'll just make it say list item, and what we'll do, we'll duplicate this line 5 times so that we have 5 items in total, all with their hamburgers to the right of them. And so that's good. We'll now get on to styling this. Okay, because the only thing that we're going to have on the markup file is just that singular items div, and we want this items div to be centered both horizontally and vertically. So in the direct center of the screen, we will make the body be a flex container, and we'll set its height to be 100% of the viewing height, the actual viewport, so that we can actually center it vertically in the middle. The items div, and then as I said, display div, and then both justify content and align items to be center, so that both axes are centered. And then we'll give it some padding as well, 1 relative unit on all different sides. As for the items div, we will set it to be position relative, because we want the individual item divs to be positioned absolute relative to this items container. And then we'll set its width to be 800 pixels, which will be the exact same as the width of the item. So as I mentioned before, position absolute, so that it's based off of its parent, which is relatively positioned. Background color, we'll have a hex color for that, and it will be E6, 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 so E6 3 times. And again, width 800 pixels for reasons that I already said. Left, we want its left edge to be aligned with the left edge of its container. And basically we want, so if we just look at this now, they're all going to be in the exact same place because they're all position absolute. But if what we need to do is we want to give it some vertical height to them, so we get 70 pixels. It's important that we do it this way and not using padding. However, you may not want to do this because, you may think that you don't want to do this because it means that our text can't be centered vertically. But to center it vertically, we simply change the line height to 70 pixels, same as the height, and this will center it in the middle of the text. So in the middle, vertically speaking, anyway. So that's what we do. Again, it's important that we do it this way instead of using padding, for reasons that will become very clear later on. And we'll set one size to be 2 rel, and we'll deal with the horizontal centering of the text like so, with text align, and make it so that our cursor changes to a pointer when we hover over these item divs in the items container. And we'll also make it so we can't actually highlight this text here, and you do that using a fairly new property called none. And because we use post CSS on this will automatically be rendered on the website. It will use vendor prefixes, etc. And lastly, we want to set some transition for both the top property, which I have access to because of the position absolute of these elements, and we'll give it ease out, and we'll also do the same for the left. And these two properties, we will offset the item div in question, top with the vertical, left obviously with horizontal offset. In addition to this, what we'll need to do is, it won't really come in useful at the moment because we haven't actually applied the selected property or set attribute to any of these item elements. However, we will later on. So if we have an item element, an item div, a div with a class name of item, and as a selected attribute with value of yes. So an example will be like this. So if we had a div like that, which obviously we don't at the moment, then what we will do is we will simply remove the transition. We don't want the transition to be applied to this item, div. And obviously, the last, we got 2 more really, but we got hamburger and center. So what we'll do, we will style the hamburger div like so, and this will be position absolute. And since its parent item is also position absolute, it will be position in relation to its absolute container. Because remember, it doesn't matter, as long as its parent container is positioned to something other than static, absolute will always be positioned in relation to that. It will match its top left. It will match its top left edge. Its top left edge will align with the top left edge of its container, which is what I'm trying to say. And I give 10 pixels all around. Width, we'll make it a square of 70 pixels on both dimensions. Display will be flex, and the flex direction will go from top to bottom, so a column. And then we'll say justify content, space between. So have the items starting at the top, and then the last item in the flex container will be at the bottom of the flex container no matter what. And then what we'll say, we'll use a pseudo element, we'll use the before pseudo element, and we'll also use the after one as well, because we will create two, because currently, although we created this hamburger container here, you know, it doesn't actually have any representation on our web page, and that's because we need to actually give some children to its to the container, to the hamburger container. And one way, well, we can create two of those children just in plain CSS using these pseudo elements, and we'll need to say content to be nothing for both of them because we don't want any text for these pseudo elements. What we will say though, we'll make the background color to be a hex value, and it'll be 80 3 times. So this is just a darker shade of grey basically. Width 100% of its flex container. Height 7 pixels. And we'll actually copy the contents here, and as well, because we want a third. At the moment, this is all we have, but we want a third row in the middle, and that will complete the hamburger, which is the reason why we have the center div, because we've exhausted all of the pseudo elements both before and after, so we need to do this one manually. But it's not a real problem because we've already got the properties that we need, so paste them in like that, and here we go. Here's a hamburger menu. Obviously, we have five item divs in total. Obviously, you know, it only looks like one because they're all stacked on top of each other in the same place, due to the fact that we use absolute positioning. So we'll now go on to our JavaScript file where we'll be spending the majority of this tutorial, and we'll sort all of that out in here. Alright, so the first thing that we will do is we will create a function called position items, and we will call this immediately after we've declared it, like so that it gets called on initial document load. And what we will do, we will create a reference to all of the item divs, and we'll do that using query selector or, as is standard. Well, it is nowadays anyway, maybe not back in the original version of JavaScript, but it definitely is standard now for selecting multiple items. And then obviously this will be a list, this will be an array of DOM elements, so we can loop through them using the for each method. And then what we will do is we will item.style.top, so we will change the top offset. And what we'll do, actually we'll need an index. Instead of using the index that's provided by the for each method, we'll just declare it ourselves because it will come in handy later on. So yeah, and then obviously we'll need to increment it. We'll just increment it at the end, like so. So it starts off at 0 and then it increments by 1 on each iteration of the loop. And so we will offset it by 70 because remember 70 is the height of the item divs, and we'll need to so obviously this will be initially 0, so it will just be 0, so no offset basically ultimately. And the second one, it'll have an offset of 70, so slightly below. And what we'll do, we need to add pixels onto the end of this as well to give it some actual units. So now if we save, we go back, as you can see, just ignore the fact that they're not positioned correctly. We'll sort that out later. But yeah, we are actually getting them as they are here, but we do want some padding between them. So add another plus, and we'll have a padding of 10. So we'll say index counter times 10. And so now, yeah, we get some padding between them. Again, we'll solve this just shortly. But another thing that we'll do is, this is important for later on, we will set an order attribute on each element, and that will simply be the index counter plus 1. So that the very first one, instead of it being 0, it will be 1, and it will say 1, 2, and then it will go up by 1 each time starting at 1. So yeah, that won't make any changes, but if we look actually on these elements, as you can see, there is an order attribute. So it's now time to solve, or well, you deal with the problem of that it's not actually centered. And the reason being it's not centered, well, it is horizontally but not vertically, and the reason being is because it's got no height. The actual items div has got no height to it, which is the reason why our body flexbox can't center it vertically, because it doesn't know how high it is. So we need to instantiate that height. So what we'll do is we will get the number of items, and this will be outside the method. Actually, we'll just copy this, and then we'll say, we'll get the length of them, so how many do actually exist, and then we'll say what we're doing, and then we'll simply declare a reference to the items container div on its own, and then we'll say we need to set its height. So we'll do that like so, and its height will be number of items times by the height of them, so 70, and then we need to plus the offset as well. So we need to take into account the offset, and finally we need to give it a value, so pixels. And so now, if you go back, as you can see, it's now centered both vertically and horizontally. So there's our problem solved. Well, that problem is solved anyway. Okay, so we'll now need to declare some global variables, so we'll mark them. We'll mark what they are here. The first one will be pos, and this will track the x and y coordinates of our cursor at all times on the page. So we'll mark that here, mouse coordinates, and whilst we're at it, we'll also get the items LA. So instead of this, we'll just use items LA. And we'll just declare it here because we will also be using that later on, and we will declare a lot more of these global variables later on, because this is quite a complicated effect and we need access to values in all sorts of functions and event listeners and stuff, and we can't really do that with arguments, so they do need to be globals, unfortunately. But anyway, for now we will add an event listener to the window object, which is the reason why we don't need to specify what it's actually applied to. We can just write out add event listener like so, and that will automatically get applied to the window object. And we will very simply get access to the x and y offsets of our cursor that triggered the event listener from client x and client y respectively. So pos.y equals e.client y like so, and then we can console.log pos to see our x and y coordinates every time we move the mouse. Obviously we need to log. So yeah, as you can see, we are tracking our mouse movement like so, so that's very good. Unfortunately though, we need to get our mouse pos, we need to get it in relation to the items array. But you know this items container, and this is because this is what the items are positioned in relation to, and they're obviously positioned absolute in relation to their relative container. And so to get our items being moved around, we need to base our coordinates off of the items array as well. And so to do that, it's very simple. We simply get items array and then offset left for the x, obviously, and then as for the y, that will be offset top. And we'll also, whilst we're at it, we will also subtract. We'll do it like this, just so we make things clearer. Put these in parentheses. And we'll also subtract window.scroll. Y is taken into account, if we've got a really short screen, then we'll need to take into account the scroll as well. So say for example, if we're like this, and we have a scroll bar, we need to take into account how much we scrolled as well, because obviously this is the top of the screen in this case, but obviously it isn't the top of the screen in relation to the items LA, which begins up here with the first items. That's the reason why we include scroll Y as well. Well, now that we have the event listener, we need to select all of the items, so we can do that with query selector all like so. So items, all of the item elements in the items container, and again loop through them all with for each. And this time we'll get access to both the item and the index in our ES6 arrow function, which you can use obviously because using Babel, so we don't have to worry about compatibility when we use these arrow functions. And we'll add an event listener onto each item that we're looping over. The event will listen for a mouse down event. So yeah, that's when this callback will be activated. This one here. And we'll also, whilst at it, we'll also create a mouse up event listener as well. And we'll say if pos.x hasn't been initialized, say for example, if we haven't moved the mouse at all and this event callback has never been called, then we'll return so that the code below this never gets called at all. And what we'll now need to do, we'll now need to actually create more global variables. We'll create mouse down, which will determine whether our mouse is currently down, is clicked down on a list item. Obviously it will be set to false by default because we can't really click anything on initial page load. So we will say need to be true for logic in mouse move event listener to be activated, and it does as well. So what we'll go down to our event listener now, and then below this line here we'll say if it's false, which it currently is at the moment, then we'll return so that none of the code below this will be activated if it is set to false. And along with these global variables, we need to create some more as well. So what we'll do, we'll say let selected item equals null, and this should be the item that we're currently clicked on. So what we'll say allows clicked on item to be tracked in mouse move event listener. Again, we're declaring all these global variables now because it just makes more sense to, so that we don't have to go back and forth. And we'll need to create diff as well, and this will be a similar format to the pos. The only difference is that this allows us to actually drag around the items in relation to the spot that we actually clicked on. Again, this will make more sense later on. Mouse can drag item on the correct spot, and along with selected item we need to declare a let reset transition. Again, we won't be using this immediately, but its use will become more clear later on. And finally we'll set, because we will be using this 400 milliseconds value, which is what the 400 means. So 0.4 seconds, we'll be using this multiple times in applications. So yeah, that's all the global variables done, and we'll now go back to our mouse down event listener, and we'll add to this, we'll say if reset transition is true, and obviously it's set to false by default. We also don't, because it's a cooldown period and we don't want this to be allowed to be activated. So yeah, the first thing that we'll do, obviously if we can proceed, is we'll set mouse down to be true, because it now is, because obviously our mouse is down, which is what this event listener is all about. And then we will initialize the item that we're currently that triggered this event listener. We'll assign that to selected items so that we can access it in like the mouse move event listener, etc. And then what we'll do, we'll initialize diff, both of its y and x properties, and it's obviously its y property we'll use pos y, and it will minus item, obviously the item that triggered this event listener, dot offset top. And offset top is basically just it's the difference between its container. Obviously, if it hasn't, if the element in question has no container, then it will be the viewport. The difference between its top edge and the top edge of its container, and same thing for the left. Obviously, just 4 different axes. So we'll do the same for the x property, pos.x minus item.offset left, like so. And then what we'll do, we will then get access. We'll then declare some local variables. So offset y equals pos.y minus diff.x. And what this will do, this will allow us to. So this is currently a difference between where we are and where the top edge is of the element. So what we're doing here is we are getting our getting where we are, and we are minusing it by that amount. And then with these offset values, we will be able to add them to. Oh, you'll see in a second, but let me just get this one done. Minus. Yeah, so now it'll become clear what we're actually doing, and these are 2 variables, offset y and offset x. That's how we can declare multiple variables, separate that out with a comma, like so. So what we'll say item.style.top equals offset y plus pixels, and then we'll do the same here for the other one. And then we'll also need to say, we'll also need to set the, yeah, that should be left side. Yeah, that makes more sense. And then we'll also need to set the z index so that it appears above all elements. We'll set it to be 1000. And then we'll need to set its attributes. This is very important now because we're now moving around the elements, and we're moving it around based off of its top and left properties. And so we need to set it selected to be yes, so that this element that we're now dragging around won't have the animation applied to it, which is what all this was about. Oh yeah, and before I get ahead of myself, I should also note there's a mistake there. That should be diff.y. Very important. But yeah, if it illustrates a point now, if you click on these, then nothing happens because of the offset. But I'll show you what happens if we don't use the offset, and why it's important that we do. So if you click on them now, as you can see, they get moved around to wherever our cursor is, but they get moved around. Whoops. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there. They get moved around by the top left corner, and we use the offset so that they actually get moved around based on where we currently clicked on the item. And because we haven't done anything on a mouse move, that's the reason why when we click on them here, nothing happens, but they will happen very shortly in our mouse move event listener. We're just getting the code that we need in here. So basically on our mouse move, we will copy this, but instead of using the item, obviously we don't have access to item anymore, so what we'll need to do, yeah, we'll need to change this, so it's, because we don't have access to item anymore. And so now if we test this out, we should now be able to actually move stuff. Again, we won't be able to release it, but as you can see, we are actually moving it when we move our mouse around. And what we'll do in the mouse up, we will simply set mouse down, and then we'll set that back to false. And so now when we release our mouse, we should actually be able to leave it alone. And now, you know, you can do all this stuff and move them around like that. But yeah, this is a basic gist of how we're getting items to move around, etc. What we'll now do is, because remember on the item that we clicked on, we gave it this, sorry, not when we clicked on them, but when we actually positioned them all, using this method here, position items, we gave them all an attribute of order. We're going to extract this of the selected item now. So we'll say let order of selected item, and we'll pass it into a number because we'll get it back, because the get attribute method gets back its values as strings. And remember we call it order, so we get it back like that. And then what we'll do, we'll say we'll test for a new position, and we'll say if order of selected item, if it's not equal to 1, because if it is 1, then that means that it's this top item here, which means that there's nothing above it ever. So what we'll say is we will call the position items method again. No, we won't actually. So I don't know what we'll do is we will get access to let before item, and before item will simply be the item that's before this one, that's above it, and obviously we know that it exists because it's not equal to 1. So what we'll say document dot query selector like so, and we'll use backticks because we can, because I mean, have to worry about compatibility, because the reason that I already said, because we're using Babel. And then we'll say order, because remember the order attribute, we're currently selecting by the order attribute here, which is the reason why we're not using query selector all, because we only want 1, and we'll surround this in quotes as well because we need to. Order of selected, we'll just copy it from here, and then we'll say -1, so that we know that it's the one before. And then we'll close off like so. And then what we'll do, we'll say we'll get a Boolean value before middle will be a Boolean value, and we'll say pos.y is less than before item dot offset top, and we want the middle of this before item element. So the way that we get that is we say before item dot client height divided by 2. So the offset top's the top edge plus half of its height, and then that will give us the middle value. So if our cursor is above the middle value, because remember the closer that we get to the top of the viewport, the lesser the value is, the lesser the offset value is. So that's how we know that it's above the middle of the above element, above item. And now we can say if before middle, if this boolean is set to true, then we will turn so that nothing in this callback is met. If this is met, if this if condition, but above this, we will not only change the selected item dot set attribute, because now it's now moved to a new position, or will be. Well, it will be because it's clearly moved above. So we'll need to change its order to be the order of selected item -1. Because it's now been moved, that's not -1. And then what we'll do, we'll say position items order of selected item -1, and we don't have a way to take this in at the moment, so we need to have a way to take it in here. So we will say insert index as an argument, and then we'll equal that to null, because you need to give it initial value, because we didn't initialize a value here, so we will get an error otherwise with what we're about to do. And what we'll say if well, actually, first of all, what we need to do is we need to get access to we need to change the items list, that it filters out all of the items with the select element. I'll show you more about this in a second, but first of all, this is actually a special type of array called a DOM array, and we don't want this. We want it just to be a normal array, and the way that we can do this is we can use array.prototype.slice.core, and I can't really explain this at the moment because it will take me too long. But essentially, this will turn, if we pass items list here, then this will return an array containing the values of this DOM array. So now items list will just be a normal array, and this allows us to use the filter method on this now array, and what we can do is we can filter out all of the elements that don't have the select attribute equal to yes. So in other words, are not the element that is currently selected that we're currently moving around with a mouse. So get attribute selected, if that isn't equal to yes, then return it. So now, so I do it one line just to truncate it a bit. So now items list will contain all of the elements other than the one that we're currently moving about with our mouse. And yeah, again, remember, because we did this here on the item that we're currently moving about with our mouse. So what we'll now do is we'll say if the insert index is equal to index counter plus 1. So in other words, because with +1 in here, when we actually assign a value to these order attributes, if we're currently on the element that that we have moved above, because remember -1, we moved above this element and we passed it in here. Yeah, so this is the element that we are checking for, and we currently moved above it, as defined by this boolean here, and now we pass the element order in there. So if that is the case, then we'll say index counter ++. And so now what this will do is it will mean that on this loop, this index counter will be plus, which means that we have extra spacing as well as extra padding. And so now if I show you what happens, let me just show you. Move it up, and as you can see, again, let me show you again. It's now actually working. Again, it won't. So yeah, it's actually working now. Again, we won't get the release, or any release won't work. If we release, it won't go back into its correct position. But we will get a situation where we can actually do this, and we can move them up. So now we need to do a situation where we can move them down. So we'll do that very quick. We'll say if order of selected item is not equal to we'll get the, what's it called again, the number of items. So if it's not equal to number of items, then we will get access to the, then we know that it's basically not the bottom item, and we can get access to the element that is below the item, which we know that is an element below because it's not a bottom item, so it's either one of these items above, in which case there will be a bottom item. So we'll say, instead of let before item, we'll say let after item, and then this is +1 instead. So the one that's below the order of this one. And then we'll say let after middle equal pos.y greater than after item.offset top. So if it's below the middle of this, and again we'll use the same method of not offset height, client height divided by 2. So if it's below the middle of this, and if this boolean is true, then we will we'll do all this, but instead of plus, we'll do it with minus. So now if we refresh, as you can see, we are getting a situation where this is happening. However, again, if we release, it's not going to work, and also, again, this just isn't going to work anymore if we mess it up to such a high degree. So what we need to do is we need to create one more function called position items in order, and this will not only rebuild the list once everything's back to normal, it will also make the element go back to normal, the one that we're hovering over when we release our mouse on it. So what we need to do is, well, first of all, we will do what we did here, and we'll get access to the items list as an array, not a special DOM array, which means that we don't have access to methods that are on array methods by default, like the filter method. So we'll just copy it from there, and then we'll paste it here. So items list, we have access to that now, and then what we'll do is we'll say items list equals items list dot sort. So now we'll sort through the order. The orders are done by default, so that all the elements in this array start off with the very first one with the order attribute of 1, and then it ends. The last item in this array is the order attribute of 5, because remember there's 5 list items in total. So open it up like that, and then we'll say return number a.get attribute order. So what would be a string value is instead a number, is passed as a number value because of what we did here. So if this is greater than the number of b, if it is, we use a turn it operator here, then we'll return 1. If it isn't, then we'll return -1. And doing this, again, you can look up the sort method, how it works for arrays, but this will order them based on the criteria that I just described. And so now we will loop through this now ordered items list. And again, we'll get access to item and index, like so. And we'll say if item.get attribute is selected, and if that is equal to yes, which so if we currently loop, if the item that we're currently looping through is the one that we're currently hovering over, then first of all we will remove that selected attribute so that we no longer have it, because by the time this if condition is over, this will no longer be the selected item and I'll be back in its place. And then we'll set the style dot left. Oh yeah, and also removing this will mean that the transition gets applied to it again, because remember it no longer has this, so therefore the transition starts to work, which means that when we set the left back to 0, it will transition back to its back to this value. It will transition back to this, and then what we'll do, basically the transition time as set here is 400 milliseconds or 0.4 seconds, it's the same thing. So we'll set a timeout here, and the timeout, the code in the callback will be called when the transition time is over, and the transition time will be over as set here, again 400 milliseconds, exactly the same time. And when this happens, what we will do, we'll set the z index back to 0, so that it's no longer 1000, and that when we drag other elements, they will be above this element, which is now back into its correct place. We're not at the moment yet, so I bet it will be when we've completely finished with this function in question. So that's all good. As for the other items, well, we can literally just copy what we're going to do with them from here, and we'll change the index counter with the actual index, because we can just use that now. And then what we'll say reset transition is equal to true, because we're now going to rebuild the grid once this loop is over. Once all these are positioned back in their correct place, including the element that we hovered over, because remember we didn't use the filter here on items list anymore, so it does actually pick up the element that we're hovering over, unlike this top method here. We'll set when reset transition is true, or reset back to false when the transition is over, because remember this gets activated immediately, but we still have to wait 400 seconds before this element is back into its place, and we'll set it back to false then. So we'll say when transition is over, and actually we'll copy this here, just we'll use different code because the timing will be exactly the same, and we'll say what we'll do, we'll get access, or we've already got access to it actually, but we'll say while items la dot first child. So whilst that has a actual child element, we will simply remove child. So by the time this while loop is over, items la will have no more children, and then what we'll do, we'll loop through items list again. Yeah, so we'll loop through that, and then we'll say items la dot append, which means add item as a child to items la after the items that are already in items la. So basically what we're doing here, we're moving and then re-adding the items elements, but just in a way so that they're ordered. So yeah, they're actually ordered now, and they're added back. And then finally we will set reset transition back to false. So now this is set back to false so that we can mouse down our elements again and do all this stuff. And And finally, so that this actually works, we'll call this method here, like so. And this should be the end now, hopefully. So yeah, we release. As you can see, this is the finished result. And if we're really quick, then we can't actually select the items to mess things up because the transition hasn't completed yet. But yeah, this is the finished result. If you got stuck at any point in this time, then look at the CodePen project. But if you're still stuck after that, then of course don't hesitate to query me in the comment section below. I would be more than happy to answer any of your questions. But more importantly, guys, peace out. I hope you enjoyed this video and have a great day. Peace out, guys.